What makes a great salesman? More than 35 years ago, the insurance industry embarked on an intensive program to solve the problem of costly, wasteful turnover among its agents. Estimates at that time indicated that there was a turnover of better than 50% within the first year and almost 80% within the first 3 years. After the expenditure of millions of dollars and 35 years of research, the turnover in the insurance industry remains approximately 50% within the first year and 80% within the first 3 years. What is the cost of this turnover? Nearly incalculable. Consider the substantial sums paid new salesmen as salary, draw on commission, expense accounts, and so on, which are wasted when those salesmen fail to sell. The staggering company costs in time, money, and energy of recruiting, selecting, training, and supervising men who inherently do not have the ability to succeed. And the vast costs caused by lost sales, dropouts, reduced company reputation, poor morale, permanently burned territory, and the like. What accounts for this expensive inefficiency? Basically, companies have simply not known what makes one man able to sell and another not. As Robert N. McMurray has observed, a very high proportion of those engaged in selling cannot sell. If American sales efficiency is to be maximized and the appalling waste of money and manpower which exists today is to be minimized, a constructive analysis must be made of what selling really is and how its effectiveness can be enhanced. We must look a good deal further into the mysteries of personality and psychology if we want real answers. 2 essentials. Our basic theory is that a good salesman must have at least 2 basic qualities: empathy and ego drive. Ability to feel. Empathy, the important central ability to feel as the other fellow does in order to be able to sell him a product or service, must be possessed in large measure. Having empathy does not necessarily mean being sympathetic. One can know what the other fellow feels without agreeing with that feeling. But a salesman simply cannot sell well without the invaluable and irreplaceable ability to get a powerful feedback from the client through empathy. In this discussion of the relationship of empathy and ego drive to successful selling, we will treat these dynamic factors as separate characteristics. Indeed, they are separate in that someone can have a great deal of empathy and any level of ego drive, extremely strong to extremely weak. Someone with poor empathy can also have any level of ego drive, yet, as determinants of sales ability, empathy and ego drive act on and in fact reinforce each other. The person with strong ego drive has maximum motivation to fully utilize whatever empathy he possesses. Needing the sale, he is not likely to let his empathy spill over and become sympathy. His ego need for the conquest is not likely to allow him to side with the customer. Instead, it spurs him on to use his knowledge of the customer fully to make the sale. On the other hand, the person with little or no ego drive is hardly likely to use his empathy in a persuasive manner. He understands people and may know perfectly well what things he might say to close the sale effectively, but his understanding is apt to become sympathy. If he does not need the conquest, his very knowledge of the real needs of the potential customer may tell him that the customer, in fact, should not buy. Since he does not need the sale in an interpersonal sense, he then may not persuade the customer to buy. So we frequently say in our evaluations of potential salesmen, this man has fine empathy, but he is not likely to use it persuasively. He will not use it to close. Thus, there is a dynamic relationship between empathy and ego drive. It takes a combination of the two, each working to reinforce the other, each enabling the other to be fully utilized to make the successful salesman. Since the selection of top salesmen is potentially of such enormous value, why, it might be asked, has there been so little success to date in developing methods to pre-select effectively? For at least 50 years, psychologists have been working very hard in the area of testing. Almost every aspect of human personality, behavior, attitude, and ability has at one time or another come under the scrutiny of the tester. There have been some notable successes in testing, most especially perhaps in the IQ and mechanical ability areas. Of late, personality testing, especially with the increasing use of projective techniques, has gained a certain level of sophistication. The area which has been to date most barren of real scientific success has been aptitude testing, where the aptitude consists of personality dynamics rather than simple mechanical abilities. 4 reasons. The ability to sell, an exceedingly human and totally non-mechanical aptitude, has resisted attempts to measure it effectively. The reasons for this failure up until now are many, but there appear to be 4 basic causes for sales aptitude test failure. 1. Tests have been looking for interest, not ability. The concept that a man's interest is equatable to his ability is perhaps the single largest cause of test failure. Thus, tests have been developed through asking questions of successful salesmen or successful people in other fields, with the assumption that if an applicant expresses the same kind of interest pattern as an established salesman, he too will be a successful salesman. This assumption is wrong on its face. Psychologically, interest does not equal aptitude, even if someone is interested in exactly the same specific things as Mickey Mantle or Willie Mays. This, of course, does not in any way indicate the possession of a similar baseball skill. Equally, the fact that an individual might have the same interest pattern as a successful salesman does not mean that he can sell. Even if he wants to sell, it does not mean that he can sell. 2. Tests have been eminently fakeable. When an individual is applying for a job, he obviously will attempt to tell the potential employer whatever he thinks the employer wants to hear. Given a certain amount of intelligence, the applicant will know that he should say he would rather be a salesman than a librarian, regardless of his real preference. He knows that he should say he would rather be with people than at home reading a good book, that he prefers talking to a PTA group to listening to good music, or that he would rather lead a group discussion than be a forest ranger. There are manuals on the market on how to beat sales aptitude tests, but even without such a manual, the average intelligent person can quickly see what is sought and then give the tester what the tester wants. Thus, the tests may simply succeed in negatively screening those who are so unintelligent that they are unable to see the particular response pattern sought. In other words, since they are too dull to fake, they may be screened out. The perceptive interviewer, however, is likely to notice this kind of stupidity even more quickly than the tests do, and he can probably do a better job of this negative screening than the average fakeable test. 3 tests have favored group conformity, not individual creativity. Recent critics of psychological testing decry the testers who are seeking conformity and the standardized ways in which they judge applicants for sales and other occupations. This criticism is all too valid. The creative thinker, the impulsive free spirit, the original, imaginative, hard-driving individual is often screened out by tests that demand rigid adherence to convention, an adherence, in fact, that borders on a passive acceptance of authority, a fear of anything that might in any way upset the apple cart of bureaucratic order. Paradoxically, this fearful, cautious, authoritarian conformist, although he might make a good civil servant or even a fair controller or paperwork administrative executive, would never make a successful salesman. Many of these tests not only fail to select good salesmen, but they may actually screen out the really top producers because of their creativity, impulsiveness, or originality, characteristics that most tests downgrade as strangeness or weakness. We discovered a situation of this type recently in working with a client. A company in the Southwest embarked on an intensive recruiting effort for salesmen. We began receiving the tests of a number of applicants. These tests all appeared to follow a certain pattern. The men were not quite recommendable, and all for about the same reason: a definite lack of ego drive. For the most part, they had some empathy, and without exception, they had good verbal ability. But none had the intense inner need for the sale that we look for in a productive salesman. Many psychological tests screen out the really top producers because of their creativity, impulsiveness, or originality, characteristics that most tests downgrade as strangeness or weakness. After about 20 such tests came through our office, we questioned the sales manager as to what criteria he was using for screening the men who took the tests. We found that before he gave the applicants our test, he had them take the sales aptitude test that had been developed by his company some years before. Those men who scored high on that test were given our test. We had previously analyzed that company's test and found it to be a fairly good verbal abilities measure, and to some extent a measure of intelligence and insight. Men with strong ego drive could not, as a rule, score near the top of that test. And so the very men with the quality we were seeking, strong ego drive, were actually screened out. We then asked the sales manager not to use that test, but to screen only for credit reference and general appearance, and to give our test to those who passed this simple screening. After that, we began seeing the expected number of A and B recommendable applicants, about one man in every 5. 4 tests have tried to isolate fractional traits rather than to reveal the whole dynamics of the man. Most personality and aptitude tests are totally traitological in their construction and approach. They see personality as a series or bundle of piecemeal traits. Thus, someone may be high in sociability while being low in self-sufficiency and dominance. Someone else may be high in personal relations but low in cooperativeness. Somehow the whole, or the gestalt, gets lost. The dynamic interaction that is personality, as viewed by most modern-day psychologists, is buried in a series of fractionalized, mathematically separable traits. Thus, it is said that the salesman, somewhat like the Boy Scout, should be very sociable, dominant, friendly, responsible, honest, and loyal. The totality, the dynamics within the person that will permit him to sell successfully, is really lost sight of. Clearly, someone may be sociable, responsible, and so on, but still be a very poor salesman. In our research, we attempted to bypass traits and to go directly to the central dynamisms that we believed were basic to sales ability, empathy, and ego drive. By seeking these deeper, more central characteristics, we immediately reduced the possibility of faking, since the respondent would find it extremely difficult to determine what, in fact, was being sought. Many sales executives feel that the type of selling in their industry and even in their particular company is somehow completely special and unique. This is true to an extent. There is no question that a data processing equipment salesman needs somewhat different training and background than does an automobile salesman. Differences in requirements are obvious, and whether or not the applicant meets the special qualifications for a particular job can easily be seen in the applicant's biography or readily measured. What is not so easily seen, however, are the basic sales dynamics we have been discussing, which permit an individual to sell successfully, almost regardless of what he is selling. To date, we have gained experience with more than 7,000 salesmen of tangibles as well as intangibles, in wholesale as well as retail selling, big ticket and little ticket items, and the dynamics of success remain approximately the same in all cases. Sales ability is fundamental, more so than the product being sold. Long before he comes to know the product, mostly during his childhood and growing up experience, the future successful salesman is developing the human qualities essential for selling. Thus, when emphasis is placed on experience, and experience counts more than such essentials as empathy and drive, what is accomplished can only be called the inbreeding of mediocrity. We have found that the experienced person who is pirated from a competitor is most often piratable simply because he is not succeeding well with that competitor. He feels that somehow he can magically do better with the new company. This is rarely true. He remains what he is, mediocre or worse. What companies need is a greater willingness to seek individuals with basic sales potential in the general marketplace. Experience is more or less easily gained, but real sales ability is not at all so easily gained. Among butchers, coal miners, steel workers, and even the unemployed, there are many, perhaps 1 in 10, who, whether they themselves know it or not, possess the ability to be an A, top-producing salesman, and at least 1 in 5 would be on a B or better level for most types of selling. Many of these are potentially far better salesmen than some who have accumulated many years of experience. The case of Big Jim, as we shall call him, is a good example. All we knew about Jim at first was that he had walked into the showroom of one of our automobile clients in response to its ad and had taken our test. We reported that he was the only A in the group and strongly recommended that he be hired. There was shocked silence at the other end of the telephone. We were then told that his test had been included as a joke. As it was described to us, he had ambled into the showroom one morning wearing dungarees, an old polo shirt and sneakers. He had then gone on to proclaim, "I sure do hanker to sell them their cars." The dealer had included his test just to get a laugh, or perhaps to see if we were sufficiently alert to weed him out. The man had never sold a car or anything else in his life and had neither the appearance nor the background that would indicate that he ever could sell anything. Today, he is one of the dealer's best salesmen. Soon after he started working, he hankered to see that their Seattle World's Fair and sold enough cars in the first week of the month to give him money to get there and spend 2 weeks. On his return, he made enough money in the last week of the month to equal the staff's monthly average. Obviously, most men down from the hills wearing dungarees and sneakers are not going to be top salesmen. Some, however, may be, and their lack of experience in no way reduces the possibility that they have the inner dynamics of which fine top producers are made. It is equally obvious that a great many men who present a fine appearance, a good front, do not turn out to be top salesmen. The real question, and always the first question, is, does this man have the basic inner dynamics to sell successfully? Putting emphasis on experience often works in another way to reduce sales effectiveness. A company grows used to seeing its men in various job slots, in certain departments limited to special kinds of experience. Such men may be doing a satisfactory job where they are. But it frequently happens that the blind habit of special experience has kept the company from using the man in a more effective and appropriate way. For instance, a Western company in the leasing business wanted us to evaluate a branch employing 42 men to determine why there had been a mediocre level of sales activity, why there had been some difficulties among the men, and whether some of the 42 should possibly be let go. After looking at the test of each person, we did an X-ray of the branch, that is, following the table of organization, we evaluated the staff department by department, especially in terms of who was working with, over and under whom, pointing out the strengths and weaknesses of each department. Virtually all the men on the staff were found to be worth keeping on, but a good third were suggested for job shifts to other departments. Thus, the person with greatest sales ability, together with a great deal of managerial ability, by no means the same thing, was found in the accounting department. But that job did not completely satisfy him. He has since become the new branch sales manager, a more appropriate use of his considerable ability. One of the older men, though rated an adequate B salesman, was evaluated as an A office manager. He had good empathy, but not the strongest ego drive, which was why he was a B rather than an A salesman. But on the managerial side, he had the ability to handle details, relatively rare for a salesperson. He was able to delegate authority and make decisions fairly rapidly and well. These qualities, plus his good empathy, gave him excellent potential as a manager, but not as sales manager, for his only moderate drive would have hurt him in the latter position. As office administrative manager, the position he was moved up into, he has performed solidly. The former office administrative manager, a man well able to handle details reliably and responsibly, but with little empathy and thus unable to deal understandingly with his office staff, was moved laterally into the accounting department, an area in which he had had some previous experience and where he could carefully deal with and manage details rather than people. Thus, what counts more than experience is the man's basic inner abilities. Each present employee, as well as each new applicant, should be placed in the area where he can be most creative and productive. The steel worker, the coal miner, the displaced textile worker, or for that matter even Big Jim, regardless of how much real sales ability each possesses, cannot suddenly start selling insurance, mutual funds, electronics equipment, or automobiles. Each one will need training. Companies have spent very large sums of money in developing effective training programs. Thanks for watching, and do subscribe.